Hello and welcome to New Spaces. I'm going to make a start. My name is Sylvia Lane and I have got the honor today to chair this fantastic panel discussion. First and foremost, a few housekeeping rules. So please, throughout the discussions, keep your audio off in order to ensure that we all have a great experience and understand what is going on. You have a chance, as you might have seen, there's a chat function. If you're new to Zoom, that is at the bottom kind of border. You can enter that at any time, any kind of questions you've got, and we'll try and answer that throughout the discussion. There will be a chance at the end of the panel discussion for you to ask more questions, so maybe you can wait till the end. That would be a little bit easier for us to manage it. But if you have an urgent kind of inquiry, then please feel free to use the chat function. So hopefully everybody will enjoy this today. I'm really excited. So we have actually come a very long way. If we think way back, our first telecommunication used to be via smoke signals. And today we are in a position to review audio and visual installations in technologically mediated hybrid environments. So it's really quite exciting how far technology has come and what it enabled us to do. So a little bit about myself and about the panel. I'm going to quickly introduce everybody. And if you can give a wave as well when I'm introducing you, that would be great. So I'm Sylvia Lane, hello. And I'm currently writing up a PhD thesis in Bas University School of Music and Performing Arts. And my aim is to find a theoretical framework to explain emotional intelligence in telematics performance and in telematics art. I'm also a curriculum manager at University Centre Western and Western-super-Mare. We are like a franchise with Bas University, and I'm leading the degree department in dance, musical theatre and performing arts. And prior to that, I've been working as a performer in opera, in musical theatre and more traditional performance environments for many years. I've got the honour to introduce our panel. So the first one up is Ghislaine Boddington. Ghislaine, give us a bit of a wave. Ghislaine is the creative director of interactive design collective Body Data Space and a reader in digital immersion at the University of Greenwich. She is a leading expert in telepresence and an internationally well-known keynote speaker and presenter. We were very honored to have you here today, Ghislaine. Next one up is Tarek Barry. Hello, Tarek.
Hello.
Tarek's a Dutch audiovisual composer and is based in Berlin. He's very well known for live AV using game engines and navigating around 3D spaces in real time, producing spectacular audiovisual compositions. Next one up, we have Joanny Lamercier, and he's a French artist focusing on projections of light in space and its influence on our perception. So he's very well known for large-scale immersive experiences and project mapping projects. And last but not least, we have John Wino, and he is a London-based artist, writer and researcher whose main expertise is in electronic music and computer art. He demonstrates very interesting twists on VR and psychedelia, exploring abstract VR experiences. Okay, so we're gonna go firstly with Ghislaine. Ghislaine is gonna give us a quick presentation. Each presenter will talk about themselves and their research and show us some fantastic demonstrations by sharing their screens. And each panelist will do that for about 3 to 7 minutes. Afterwards, the panel will discuss and instigate some food for thought. And then it's the chance for the audience to join us in this discussion. Okay, thank you, Ghislaine. Over to you.
Cool, thank you. So I'm just going to share my screen. Give me 1 minute and I'll get on top of that. Thank you very much for this good invite and exciting event, actually, really important point in time to be discussing this area of new spaces. So, right. Is that it? Yes. Can you see the screen okay, everyone? Sylvia, is that okay? Great, thank you, great. So I'm Ghislaine Boddington. I've had a nice introduction, so thank you very much. I'm the creative director of Body Data Space, and I'm at University of Greenwich as a reader in digital immersion. I also work for the BBC for Digital Planet, which is the technology flagship show, World Service. And I do a lot of work on women in tech, and I'm going to say that up front because obviously this is still a complex area in relationship to sound art too. But it's an area I've been looking at for many years and trying to get a rebalance on. So just to give you a little bit of history, I'm part of a collective called Body Data Space, and Body Data Space was convened in 2005. We're based in East London, but actually we're kind of based all over the place because we are a very fluid network of people. And Joseph Hyde, who's one of the conveners of this symposium, is a long-term member of Body Data Space as one of our actually several members who are involved in sound art in many different ways. So and Body Data Space emerged from a collective called Shinkansen, which started in 1989, which some of you may have heard of. And Shinkansen was based on, in 89, it was called Shinkansen Sound and Movement Research. And what we were looking at in 89, and about 8 of us is still around, actually, it's quite amazing, in a collective of about 30, was actually the development of sound and movement in relationship to the new technologies, this new digital revolution, as we called it then, was as it was coming along. So one of Shinkansen's very early projects actually was Vinyl Requiem, a very large-scale international co-production that we did with sound artist Philip Jack and visual artist Lol Sargent. And I don't know that anyone in this group will have been at Vinyl Requiem at Union Chapel, but it was the most incredible immersive work. And I still feel very proud of that. So we also did a whole series of work called Soundwork Exchange, which was between Germany and Britain with multiple different composers, right through to DJs involved. Club Research, which I'll show a few images of. And as Sylvia said, my main work has been in telepresence. And we've been doing telepresence workshops and residencies actually since 1992, and involving dance artists and sound artists alongside, obviously, media artists, interactive artists and visual artists, video artists, and doing mixing of this between 2 or more spaces, very complex in the 90s, obviously. This is some of the work we were doing with clubs, actually, between the End, the Shaman's Club, the End, and the ICA we did a lot at, various places. Using lag, of course, all the issues that today are kind of still there, but not there in different ways, but very much in telepresence. And the work was based on a concept of collective network collaboration, which is really looking at convergent rings of interaction between interdisciplinary authors of all different types coming together to co-author. Structured improvisation was one of the key methodologies we were using. Absolutely putting our specializations into the middle and looking at the merge between the virtual and physical. By 1995, we were talking about virtual physical blending. So Body Data Space, which comes directly from Shinkansen, our focus is and has been for a while on what we call a hypersensory body. And a part of this, of course, audio and visual are very key. But the majority of the data transmissions and receptions that I show on this slide, from the body, and the body for us is the interface and is the center of our discussion all the time, are now obviously on most of our phones and or on your computers at home. Smell and Taste is coming fast, Virtual Lemonade's on its way. So we've got artists and creators all over the world working at this data transmission of our biosignals, what we send out and what we receive back in return. And we have very clearly, as Body Data Space, looked at what we call a collaborative share space, the space where the individual with their data transmission joins many others into a central space where we connect and share together. At the moment, mostly still screen-based and headset-based and public facades, etc., where we, in the main, just use our ears, our eyes and our hands. But what we're interested in is the involvement of the whole body within this. And that meant a continuation of our work in telepresence into the 2000s, particularly a large-scale project called Skin Touch Feel, which looked at digital intimacy, trying to enable the visceral into the screen. The screen we'd love to all get rid of, but which is very much part. So basically trying to get the body right in there, in that screen. So We also commissioned a lot of works, and in 2000s, early 2000s, this was a work from using biofeedback to create sound and image, breath and heartbeat. It's a work by Tekla Shripos and Susan Cazell and others, part of a large festival we did called Future Physical. And equally this one by the collective Foam Tea Garden, a generative space, sound and immersion space done at Great Yarmouth in the large circus space there, which actually was quite a large scale work actually as part of Future Physical too. And across the years, we've tested many different tools and techniques for actually partly for industry, for creative industries. Here we're testing the Gypsy mocap system, which we did across a number of years in relationship to the creation of sound image interactions between the body and the screens, and also taking this into virtual worlds such as Second Life, where we were creating motion, sound and avatar gestures for the avatars within Second Life. So and other virtual worlds which we commissioned, where we were looking at sound and motion, telepresence, etc. within those worlds and the influence of the body and of ourselves in there. So I'm going to get to Me and My Shadow, which is a piece that we created in 2012. Joseph Hyde was a lead on this work. We did it at the National Theatre. It was a big EU project. And this project actually linked up 4 cities, London, Paris, Istanbul and Brussels, with a large-scale virtual sim hanging between them. We were using Connect for telepresence and gesture interaction. And also the body as an avatar. And in this world, you went in and you were looking to hug the other at a distance. You couldn't do it, of course, you go straight through each other, but we were linking 4 countries, 4 participants. And these circles that you can see on the floor here, and actually in this one, less good picture, but I put it in because I wanted you to see this ripple. This was the ripple that Joe made actually for each of the live participants within the telepresence environment of Me and My Shadow. And that ripple was reflected by a sound. And that sound was actually relative to each city, as was the color of the avatars, because we were actually trying to get some identification of where the location was, even though every time there was 4 people in there mixing together, crossing over under the big moon and the star sky, which is behind me actually on my screen as well at the moment. So we've moved on into a whole set of work called the Internet of Bodies, which is all about alive, connected, collective work, the virtual physical future of our bodies and senses. And of course, within that, sound is an imperative part of it. And I think a growing part of our understanding of our sense within the world itself. And a space here, the Internet of Bodies, even more full of a convergence of technologies, which we can all see starting to happen today. They're not all in there together yet. They will be within the next 10 years. And these are the new spaces that we're creating. Convergences by different artists and creative industries between, for example, gesture tech and VR, between, for example, the robotics area and implants area, starting to come into actually how we manipulate space and sound around us and imagery. Like this piece with Nick Rothwell as a composer, actually working with a deaf choreographer, Shisatu Minamura, who really wanted to work with gesture interfaces to actually create visualization of sound here. So this links into the synesthesia area. And we've worked a lot with Imogen Heap with her Mimu gloves, working her into her new creative passport project, Mycelia. This work, I think this is quite old pictures of Mimu, but Mimu is now out there for sale and is used by quite a lot of artists worldwide, creating a new spatial environment for composition. And more recently, Collective Reality in 2016, Experiencing Togetherness, a large-scale installation with generative sound and image. Again, Joseph Hyde was involved in this as a key composer. This piece travelled between London and Montreal. It was part of Future Fest in 2016. 3,000 or 4,000 people encountering, and basically a living space that did not react sound and image wise unless the groups of people within it were moving and shifting. And here the more you hugged, the more you came together, the more we created dynamic sound and image around you. Moving into what I wanted to point out, and I think the most important immersion spaces in the world, the SAT Dome in Montreal and many other domes coming up worldwide, where we can be together collectively and encounter through multiple speakers and video projections, full immersive data environments to work in. Joe came with me to do this in Montreal too, alongside Nick Rothwell. We took this from Future Fest into there. And we encourage the together hugging side. So here we are as something that sadly we cannot easily do today. This piece is not actually a possible piece to put on in this era of social distancing at this point in time. However, we are working on a new Innovate UK project with Z UK Interactive Theatre Group, looking towards social distancing, gesture and touch environments, gaming and journeys, metaverses, blockchain and data unions. So I'm sure we'll come to talk about some of those later. Thank you very much, Sylvia.
Thank you so much, Ghislaine. That was absolutely fascinating, and kind of goes in with the notion of Roy Ascott's, is there actually love in the telematics embrace? And I think this is something really important in times of the pandemic to take that further. Fabulous, yeah, absolutely. It's like
one of the most important books of our time, actually. Very well worth going back to Roy Ascott's work on the telematic embrace.
Yeah, and anybody interested in telepresence should read that book. It is amazing. So thank you, Ghislaine, again. I'm moving on, and we're going with Tarek. Tarek, thank you.
Unmute. Hello, can you hear me? Great, hi. So yes, I'm Tarek Barry. I sort of stumbled into this domain of virtual spaces sideways, because some time ago I was studying music and technology, because I wanted to know very much how I could use the computer to create music in an interesting way that would also convey to an audience how I'm working. I did not want just this sort of like this laptop, you know, you got a laptop and you got a little screen there. I did not want that to be a wall. I wanted to somehow be able to share my screen and share the way that I'm creating with people. So that's the live performance idea would, yeah, be reinvigorated within the whole technological sphere, because, you know, pre-technology, you could always see what the musician is doing. With technology, all of a sudden, everything is hidden inside of zeros and ones inside the computer, and an element got lost. And I wanted to reintroduce it. Like, I wanted to be able to show the zeros and ones, and perhaps by showing them, or in the process of showing them, also myself get a new relationship with what those zeros and ones were doing. So you have your standard musical sequencers, and they deal with space. Actually, they often have you know, you have a bunch of MIDI notes on a line, and it's being played. That already is basically a one-dimensional movement. It's a line, and it's going through a space to signify time. I started wondering what is it like if I would get two-dimensional spaces involved, if I could move in 2 dimensions through melodies and spiral inwards in a melody or go outwards diagonally or whatever. I created that during my studies. Basically, I had to, therefore, of course, make a little visual representation of my 2-dimensional space to, of course, know what's going on. I created that, and using the computer, I of course also saw that it would be very easy to take a step from there to creating a 3-dimensional virtual space, because the whole, you know, graphics card is geared up to do that, and also our brains are geared up to understand 3D. So why not add an extra dimension? So then I created a program to fly through music in 3D, where melodies and rhythms will be floating around inside a virtual space, and I'll be flying through them. And this is how, basically, from an originally very much purely musical curiosity, I stumbled into this whole virtual space domain. Yeah, and also, of course, it's only afterwards that I was able to properly recognize what I had done, and that this was me exploring space. Initially, it was just, I wanted to see if there was new ways of creating music, but only later they see, oh yeah, it was all about constantly taking 1 dimension extra and yeah, and seeing how space relates to time, and yeah, how both these things. I'm going to show you a little fragment of me flying through a virtual space that I made. Am I now currently sharing my screen? Okay, cool. So then here goes. And okay, let's see. I also want to show. You're still seeing this? Yeah, cool. Later, this evolved into, well, it evolved. There's now a version of this traveling through the three-dimensional spaces where, together with a musical partner, Lea Fabricant, we are creating all these musical, audiovisual elements inside three-dimensional space in real time. So she records her own voice or movements that she says, or moves that she's making, or clapping with her hands, or recording keyboard MIDI notes that she's playing into the computer. And these are then represented within the virtual space. So the colored lines you'll be seeing right now are representations of loops that she'd been playing in on the keyboard and recording into the virtual space. And then, so we are constructing this virtual space and flying through it simultaneously. Oh yeah, and also manipulating this audio visually. Okay, let me stop sharing. Okay, so those are some examples of what I'm doing. I've also been getting into making visuals with other musicians in a way that's less completely intrinsically interconnected, where I'm just basically creating paintings which in a much more free sense have associations with music. And I formed shitloads of thoughts on the connections between visuals and audio that I'd like to share with you guys, and also be challenged on. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. Wonderful work, and I'm particularly fascinated by the art and combining music and art. It's just such a beautiful notion. So thank you, Tarek. And It is always like we are still fighting also the things about latency and technology. So I think this is something maybe we bring that later on into our discussion, how everybody can cope with that, and what you found works really, really well. I think this is something that people will be very interested in. So thank you. We're going to move on to Joanny.
Hello. So yeah, really excited to be on this panel. I'm gonna maybe start by sharing some of my early works to give a bit of perspective on how I approach the interaction between music and visuals. So basically, I started doing projections when I was based in Bristol in the UK about 15 years ago, I believe. And I was projecting behind the DJ on a big screen, doing VJing every weekend. And quite quickly, I moved into, I tried to get rid of the screen. So I started doing projections on origamis, and I still do. I'm still really very much obsessed by these pyramids. And then I started using creative coding in my practice. What you see here is a really simple piece of code that when I move a cursor of my mouse, I can generate music, and I can also generate visuals and projection mapping. So for me, creative coding was this sort of entrance into the connection between sound, visual, music, and reality. Quite quickly, I started getting even further from the screen by projecting onto larger sculptures. So what you see here is a dual projection, but you can't see the rectangle of the projection. So it feels like the light is coming from the paper and from the structure itself. So I did a lot of experiments. This was a live with Shackleton in Bristol, I think. I was painting on the wall, and then I would synchronize the projection with the music, almost manually with a MIDI controller. But I really like this idea of exploring various formats. In this case, it was the connection or the layers, I guess, of paint, light, and sound that I found very fascinating. I then started working with other artists. They had a similar approach to me. They didn't want to project on the screen, but rather project light in space. So the idea was to project all around us on the surroundings and sort of transform this reality with light. We did a lot of different projects. This was a stage design we did in Nuit Sonore Festival in Lyon. This is Ricardo Villalobos playing in the middle of this big sculpture that we did. There's a fun story where, like, the second day, like an MC climbed onto the structure because I guess he was overwhelmed by the projection, and he fell through the structure. So it was a bit of a weird situation, but it was interesting to see how a physical structure could be part of a performance or part of, you know, this experience you create for the audience. I was lucky enough to do a lot of projection mapping on architecture. So very different context here. You can see this was in South Korea, and people were sitting and having dinner, and all of a sudden the building lights up, and we did this really sort of dystopian projection where the building crumbles and moves around, and the music made by Thomas Vaquier was also very dystopic and very dark, almost like if the architecture would take over, like the city as a machine, or the city as a sort of big computer. That was the theme of our piece. So we did a lot of those projection with anti-VJ. I always try to work within different fields, and I did this piece at Art Basel Miami 5 years ago. And the idea was to bring those sort of entertainment projection from the music industry into the sort of the art market. And so that's something I may discuss later as well, how to sort of blend different markets, different fields. This was a piece we did for Stripe Biennale in the Netherlands. The music was made by James Ginsberg, which is half of Empty Set. And here we sort of created our own structure in this industrial context. And this was also a very dark and intense installation, I guess, very black and white and very sort of geometrical as well. It was about the architecture and the cosmos. And I really love exploring those sort of black and white minimal aesthetics. This was a completely different project, but this was actually a weird one. It was a holiday window we were commissioned to do by Barney's New York. And it was a chance for me to work with musician Jay-Z. So we did these 4 projects with him where he composed the music and we worked with his label. So very different sort of workflow with the musician and the creation. But I like really exploring a lot of these different topics. Now I almost succeeded in getting rid completely of the screen. I like to do projection in mid-air, in space. So this is our latest project, Constellations, where we project on water particles that are suspended in the air. And the music of this piece was actually composed by Paul Jebanezam. We were in this work, it's less about audiovisual synchronicity, but it's more about this big, long drone, very cinematic experience and really epic, should I say. And that's something I really want to explore as well, sort of divesting from club music into more cinematic theater kind of music. So yeah, this is our latest project. There's no screen anymore. It's floating visuals. And so last year, I realized that all these projects, all these different things were not really sustainable. And I want to sort of, we will discuss new models and new formats together. But this is a kind of a research I did last year. I realized that all these projects I was doing were not sustainable. I did 90 projects over the past 13 years. And most of them were only shown once, just for a few minutes to a really privileged audience. And then I would fly to the next country to do the next project and fly to the next again. So I realized that this was not sustainable. And I looked into the energy consumption of the studio, and I gradually stopped flying. And now I'm trying to also consider how I could develop my practice without fossil fuels, plane travel, etc. I think technology could be of great help, but yeah, right now I'm in this process of like, what are the new models and the new formats to exit the fossil fuel industry? And this is my final slide. So that was last year. Very good timing. We decided to stop every new project, every new creation, and we looked into a decade of practice. And now we are deploying projects without travel. So we have a piece in the US at the moment. We had a big installation in the Netherlands as well. And now we ship stuff or we send files because the technology allows us. And we try to really lower down our emission by changing the model. I've also done this tutorial so people can recreate my installations with this tutorial. So it's a different way to deploy projects. There's no travel involved, and actually more than 100 people did their installation in their living room during the first lockdown, which is not a great economic model for me, but it was an interesting experiment, I guess. And I think that's it for my introduction.
Thank you so much. And it is, like you said, really important that we also look at the kind of sustainable kind of projects that we are like needing to produce as artists, really. And I love the kind of immersive aspect of your work. It is really quite breathtaking, and everybody who attended immersive performances is a wonderful experience. So maybe another bit of food for thought for later on in our discussion could be like the socially distanced immersive. That is huge at the moment in our industries, to provide that. And I think it is here to stay for probably a few more years. So maybe this is something we can have a little think about. But first, over to John.
Okay, so I'm going to give a bit of an introduction into my own work. And I'm also going to use this to kind of pose a few kind of thoughts and sort of questions about the idea of new spaces to the panel. So my background is originally in electronic music and electroacoustic music composition. So I originally did my PhD in music composition at Keele University. And yeah, later on, I also did, so a lot of my electroacoustic compositions were incorporating aspects of electronic dance music, and also exploring ideas of altered states of consciousness and psychedelia. So they were kind of constructed in the form of basically kind of sort of psychedelic journeys through sound. I also later on did some sort of sound design for games, so some sort of commercial work. I've also been quite into doing audiovisual work for quite a long time as well. So creating originally kind of fixed media audiovisual compositions such as visual music films, some of which have been sort of previously screened at Seeing Sound. And I got into doing things with direct animation for some of those as a way to kind of generate quite sort of organic psychedelic visuals. So yeah, and I've also done various work kind of exploring the idea of altered states and representations of hallucinations through game engine technologies. So I originally got into kind of exploring this through modifications for the game Quake, and later on exploring ideas of things you can do in Unity, where basically in one form or another you're either kind of representing the visuals or the sonic aspects of what someone might subjectively experience during a hallucination. So I'm really interested in kind of the idea of using audiovisual technologies and interactive technologies to kind of simulate altered states of consciousness in different kinds of ways, which is something we've been seeing a lot of projects doing more and more of recently, where you have now kind of VR experiences which will kind of take you on shamanic journeys and this kind of thing. I've also done some projects kind of exploring full dome and biofeedback technologies. And in 2018, I published a book called Inner Sound, which is about altered states of consciousness in electronic music and audiovisual media. So it kind of provides basically a wide-ranging discussion of how altered states are represented or induced through various forms, ranging from sort of shamanic art and music through to sort of psychedelic rock and rave music and VJ performance and films and video games and virtual reality. So I also do some bits of my own kind of VJ performance as well. And I do things with other mediums such as paint as well sometimes. So the right-hand one's actually a work in progress, which is sat in my living room at the moment, which I'm going to do some more bits on. So I kind of do things with sort of airbrush and spray paints, acrylic paints, but also sometimes kind of using things like digitally cut stencils, which sometimes I'll generate patterns for using code and things like this. So the one on the left-hand side is one which also has a an augmented reality app to go with it. So it's a kind of fixed painting, but when you view it through an AR device, it brings the kind of still panels to life as kind of motion graphics, basically. So it's kind of integrating sort of painting and ideas of VJing. I also collaborated with creating some elements for Gnosis, which is a VR project that's available on the Oculus Rift, which is a kind of cyberpunk sort of word game puzzle experience. One of my own recent projects, which is going to be discussed later on in my paper at Seeing Sound, is Cyberdream VR, which is a kind of prototype sort of journey through sort of rave visuals and sort of vaporwave visuals with interactive features, and that's for Oculus Quest. So that's something I've been working on. I also co-chair and edit the proceedings for EVA London, which is the annual BCS conference on electronic visualizations and the arts. If anyone's interested in this, the call for next year is currently open. We had the online edition of EVA in November. Normally it's around July. Obviously this year's been a bit unusual in various ways. And I've got another book that's coming out probably the year after next, which is called Explosions in the Mind, Composing Psychedelic Sounds and Visualizations, which is another book which is kind of exploring themes of altered states and ways of creating sort of psychedelic sounds and visualizations, and focusing a bit more on my own sort of creative practice and some of the projects that I've mentioned. So in relation to the theme of new spaces, I wanted to kind of sort of basically brainstorm a few different ideas, and it might be interesting to hear what the panel have to think about these things, as well as perhaps the wider attendees of Seeing Sound. So I was thinking about different kinds of space, and obviously we have sort of lots of different ideas that have been touched on already by the panelists. One of the things I think we could think about is virtual spaces, and the ways that different technologies and some of the kind of new immersive technologies that we're using are allowing us to do interesting things with sound and visuals, which explore different ideas of space. So thinking here about things like VR experiences, which are exploring sort of sound and image, also things like mixed reality experiences. So how do we have kind of synthetic layers of sound and graphics, which are superimposed over the kind of real physical world? Things like sort of domes and things as well. So other forms of sort of immersive projections using perhaps video mapping technologies, multiple projectors, and how we integrate those with spatial audio in different kinds of ways. I think there's also some interesting questions about kind of the physical spaces where we actually put this stuff. So, you know, obviously live concerts is kind of one of the sort of forums for this stuff, but obviously that's been kind of limited in 2020, and I guess we're all kind of hoping that this stuff will gradually come back. Also likewise with things like putting this kind of stuff in the context of galleries and things as well, which can create different kinds of experiences and opportunities. And obviously in the kind of pandemic context, we've seen a lot of kind of sort of music festivals and events kind of go into virtual formats through forms such as live streaming. And there's been some quite interesting and sometimes quite strange experiences that have come out of this, I think. So this is a still from the virtual edition of the Tomorrowland EDM festival, where you have basically a computer generated festival environment with a kind of full light show, and the crowd are kind of animated avatars, and the DJ is superimposed and is performing to sort of avatars. So it's quite a strange thing in some ways, and quite uncanny. And I suppose there's a question now, because of the context of 2020 has made these kind of things not just nice to have, but kind of essential as a means for finding ways to kind of connect people through experiences of music and visuals. So then the other theme we could think about as well is how sound and visuals may create different kinds of experiential spaces. So I've been quite interested in Rackmill Fishman's discussions that he has of the idea of using immersive technologies for participatory collaborative sound and music performances. So thinking about where things like Tomorrowland are essentially kind of passive experiences that you watch, how can we create kind of new ways to kind of harness these technologies in ways that people can kind of actually create things within them, and that providing more of a kind of creative and a sort of social element, which is sort of accessible to lots of different people. So my own project is Cyberdream, and I'm going to play a short video of this, which hopefully you'll be able to see and hear. Okay, so yeah, that's my my current sort of prototype project that I've been exploring, and basically kind of the idea is to create this sort of journey through sort of rave music and synesthetic visuals, but also have these kind of interactive sound toys that let you sort of paint with sound in that environment. So I'm kind of thinking about this idea of how eventually we might be able to have these kind of spaces that people can go into where they can sort of actually create sound and visuals, and that might be a sort of collaborative experience as well. So yeah, and I guess the other sort of piece of the puzzle is also thinking about the new kinds of interfaces we might be able to use with these things. So things like brain-computer interfaces and sort of EEG and eye tracking, and how they might be involved in these kind of experiences, and perhaps sort of measuring emotion or representing emotions in different kinds of ways. So those are some of my kind of thoughts around sort of new spaces, which I can sort of summarize as basically some questions that maybe the panel will get a chance to explore, which are: what are the new virtual spaces available for sound and visuals? Where can we physically locate these experiences? And obviously this is kind of quite a pertinent question at the moment. There's a lot of challenges involved in that. And also, what are the new kinds of experiential, imaginative, affective, or emotional spaces that can be afforded by sounds and visuals? And oh, and I added an extra one as well, just for fun. So that was also sort of thinking about possibly what the role of education and sort of spaces of research and university might be able to offer for the above, and what kind of problems and things we should be addressing, and where we should be going with this. So that's me. Thanks.
Oh, thank you so much, John, and thank you also for actually putting these questions out there. I think these are really useful. So if I could please ask the panel to unmute, as we are now starting like more the discussion, and audience, please feel free to type in any kind of questions that are coming up from your side, or kind of ideas that you would like to contribute to, and I'm trying to interject those with the panel discussion. I think one of the kind of key themes also from all of your wonderful art came across as the new consciousness that we are developing, working in these mediated spaces. And I think this is kind of important if you're also looking in the way we are taking this research further and putting it into like universities and educational spaces. And I think we need to develop this new kind of consciousness before we can even, like, rather than developing the space for the space kind of like for itself, like the art speaking for itself, it also needs to have a meaning. And particularly in the pandemic, I believe that experiences and meaning to life are really, really important to people nowadays. So over to you, panel. Feel free to start it off, whoever would like to give us some thoughts. It's always the first one. I like kind of like.
I guess I could say something about that. So I think one of the things that's definitely interesting to me is how, in sort of the current context, you have on the one hand, there's basically sort of a crisis of everyone being really quite isolated in their boxes, and there's kind of a need for sort of human connection, which we're having to sort of fulfill through virtual technologies and things, basically. So one of the things that's interesting for me is possibly the idea that we might be able to kind of use to create kind of virtual spaces that allow creative collaboration and performance, so people can interact in ways that are kind of creating sound and visuals and things, basically.
Absolutely, and it is important to create these spaces and to give kind of people something to look forward to in a way as well. And with kind of technology, it enables us so much nowadays, particularly also collaborating without a physical kind of being in the same room, the necessity to be able to be in the same room. So Ghislaine, you had a lot of beautiful work in terms of like kind of working together, collaborating in the real space and in the mediated space. So maybe you have some ideas how we can actually develop this new kind of consciousness.
Yes, I think, I mean, everybody said it. This year has been, the most bizarre scenario where we've all been kind of kicked up the bum into using telepresence, and there's no choice. Yeah, we've got, whether it's work, social, home, whatever. So, and of course, that has been, it's taken quite a few months, I think, even for those of us that are used to this, to actually do this shift around in terms of it being constant, absolutely constant, the only way that you can reach out and be with people, etc. So on a mass level of public using it, for me, it's been a bit like a kind of bizarre universal, horrendous universal research group. But this, when this happened, because my work has been based in telepresence since '89, the main key part of it. But I think having watched this year and seen, as we all have, some of the kind of trials and there have been creative interaction from people from their homes, not even necessarily artists or creatives, but choirs who are singing together, various, and then some of the orchestras have come into it, etc. Very fast starting to use these link ups. Has been positive, I think, in terms of what John was talking about, the actual involvement and participation of others in creative use of these sound and visual scapes. So across the 90s and early 2000s, there's been many composers who have worked with telepresence space, as we all know. And some amazing stuff with sound artists based in 10, 12 different countries, creating quite complex notations and scores. The notations are fascinating, absolutely great. There's some great stuff out there for how to keep real time together, and simultaneous stuff. But I don't think we're seeing yet into the telepresence space of today, this Zoomification space, the real creativity coming through that will be possible. What we will see next year is some massive developments in new platforms, which will be brought through, unfortunately, mainly from the corporate and commercial sector, for spaces where convergences of technologies happen in a way which Zoom can't do now. Yeah, and we'll see that creativity start to flow. And also in metaverses and in virtual worlds. There's a lot happening, and we'll see an abundance of possible new spaces to work in. And I think most importantly, to enable interactive sound from not just artists and creatives, but also from a mass join-in as such, a creativity for everybody.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ghislaine. I've got a question here from Andrew Connor. Thank you, Andrew, for asking this. This is quite a lovely question here. So John was talking about physical spaces as well as virtual. We've had a couple of students placing their virtual audiovisual environments within a corresponding physical space. So there is a real interaction with objects. What are the panelists' views on this combination of VR and real world?
May I ask? So I didn't quite catch it, but is it about having a how do you call this? Replica of a real life, let's say, gallery space, and visiting this in the VR? Is that sort of like an example of this?
I believe, Andrew, that is kind of what you're asking. Yes, Tarek. I think that is kind of like, kind of the corresponding physical space with the audiovisual environment.
Okay, so we're talking about having a physical space simulated in a virtual environment, and not so much because I was also thinking it could be interpreted as that you have virtual environments represented in a physical space that you're really in. So I was wondering just which one of the two we were talking about.
Yeah, and Andrew actually commented in the chat here, so maybe you want to incorporate that, panelists.
Oh yeah, the real space can be mundane against the design world. Okay, so I do have thoughts. I'm just wondering they really are specific to what Anna was talking about. But one thought okay, first of all, I'm not fully aware of all the different experiments that are going on in virtual reality. Even though I'm myself creating a virtual reality, I'm not that well versed in what's going on. But one thought that's been popping up recently in seeing how people are moving from real, physical, tangible space into virtual reality is that I think that there should be a little bit more attention paid to which aspects of real life simply cannot be replicated. in virtual reality. So that and actually the concept of mourning has come into my mind, that actually it's important to also accept and actually mourn specific aspects of real life that cannot be one-on-one translated. It sucks, and that is the end of that story. It's sad, and that is also just an essential truth. How in this mourning is an acceptance of indeed the thing that we lost, that we lose, but also perhaps a doorway to understanding what the fundamental differences are. It's not just a loss, there's also things that cannot be thought of in real life that are possible in virtual space. So it's also the question, what cannot be taken from real life into the real world and is lost? What perhaps should not be taken from real life into the virtual world? Because there's also a lot of limitations in real life that if you really let your mind roam free, why would you want to keep them? Why, for instance, does your body always need to have a similar shape? Why do things all need to be on a relatively similar scale? You can have an artwork that is as big as the moon or as tiny as a molecule, and you can have those things next to each other. You can go really crazy into these worlds. So I think that there's just a lot of thought that would need to go into, what can you translate, what can you not translate, what don't you want to translate, or what can be invented out of thin air. So that's just a very general thought that I had with all the recent developments that have been going on.
I think that's a really interesting point, and it kind of relates to one of the sort of examples I mentioned where you have these kind of virtual festivals. For me, it's weird precisely because it is imitating the form of a real festival, and it's kind of like, although that could be interesting, it's also, you don't need to, because it could have any kind of form. So putting DJs in sort of these 3D environments that resemble what a real festival looks like can be cool, but we could also think about what these other things might look like and find new interesting sort of opportunities in that.
Anybody else want to contribute?
I actually had read the question the other way around, and we're looking at this re-physicalization of the virtual, which is a trend that's happening. We're seeing it in many forms, and particularly at a kind of participative level. So, and I think that we will, in the next 5 years or so, see a much more blurring of that happening, particularly with the advancement of augmented reality, where we will be using both the virtual and the physical to navigate ourselves around real world environments. And whether it's sound cue or an image cue, augmented reality will take us to the next place or where that artist or creative wants you to move, or the options that you have to go there. So I think it's really interesting, this re-physicalization of the virtual, which is coming through gesture interfaces, gaze interfaces, and obviously through the also locative and positioning, VPS positioning, because we can actually locate virtual within real space and it can be left there and picked up. And sound's got a great role to play in that, actually, to refine those things. But I think the blur is the most important thing. The blending of these virtual physical, because that's how particularly younger generations over 20 don't even think other than that. It tends to be older generations that we tend to see the difference between the two. I definitely have got two teenagers and they just flow between virtual and physical very easily. But I think also that the intimacy and trust side and the kind of more direct responsiveness we need into this shared space does need to be in a virtual physical blended way.
Absolutely. And let's talk a little bit more about technology in itself. So a lot of artists in kind of a mediated performance space, it is actually not about the technology. Technology is the means to make it happen, right? Technology should not be there as a standalone kind of like artistry. It is about the art in itself. And so maybe there are some thoughts from the panel on the actual technology that we're using. Are we disguising it, or are we openly actually saying, okay, this space is definitely a mediated space or technologically enhanced space?
So I think one of the one of the issues which kind of connects with this is something that Joanny mentioned, which is the point of kind of the sustainability of some of these platforms. And I think one of the things that kind of interests me is the idea that a lot of people that are doing the kind of artistic stuff like we're doing are kind of making these sort of ephemeral things which are difficult to sometimes integrate into things that will be kind of lasting or sort of widely accessible on more available platforms. And the platforms that do exist for these kind of experiences, where if we look at virtual reality, it's things like Oculus Quest or whatever, are kind of meaning that you'd have to put that kind of work in spaces which are kind of owned by basically Facebook and this kind of thing. So you have to have your Facebook login, and your work would have to be kind of approved by Facebook and Oculus to get it on their sort of platform. So there's some kind of barriers there, and there's a bit of a mismatch, I think, sometimes between doing things which sort of work that you could put in a gallery or something, but if you actually want these things which are sort of more widely available and sort of for people to access, then there's possibly some barriers to that in terms of the technology. And there's a question of who sort of owns these spaces, basically.
I've got a question here from Owen Fender. Actually, that's quite a interesting one. Will haptic feedback and remote love toys be able to extend and deepen connection in virtual space? That reminds me a little bit of a film I watched many years ago called Minority Report. You might have seen that in the early 2000s. So that was actually where people went into these virtual worlds to, for their pleasure, and that was kind of the only amusement that was around. So I think that is a really valid question. So any of thoughts from the panel here?
Well, I work a lot in this area of digital intimacy. And yes, of course, part of it is remote love, and remote love and sex. This area is hugely developed and commercial already. There's many remote connectivity, dildos and various other love toys, which are on sale now already. So the haptic feedback side we know has come through gaming, and I feel we will see this develop now a lot more, gesture tech and into other scenarios. And yes, of course, this is all about deepening connection, but we don't obviously just need it to be about future love and sex. It needs to be about bonds and trust and belongings within groups like this, even how we actually find each other. And I think one of the key things probably to say is that telepresence, and I've learned this from many years of working in it, is a highly performative form. Actually, it's really, really hard to get your energy across into this form without giving it and actually extending yourself into it, whether it's through, whether it's energy or whether it's facial expressions. We lose so much non-verbal communication because we're just seeing heads up most of the time, not seeing hands, not seeing enough. And 87% of our communication comes through non-verbal. It's only 13% of what we say that matters at all. So we've got to find more ways to deepen and create bonds and trust within these environments, the longer we have to work and stay in them and socially. So beyond the love toys and further.
It always feels like a little bit of a very paradoxical quest, which I'm curious about how you think about that. If you enter the area of an uncanny valley where you're very close to something real or emotional, but you're not quite there, then it can also really confuse somebody emotionally and blur the lines between what's fake and what's real. And so they lose a trust, basically. It's precisely because you get so close to something that feels like love or that feels like something real or sexual or whatever. And it can be, it's clearly there's all these catfishing stories and whatever. There can be all kind of strange and sometimes very scary reality behind that. So it is not me dismissing the idea of tele-love and all that kind of stuff, but precisely searching for that can also create the opposites, just like also Facebook is about bringing people together, supposedly, but also it really separates people. How do you think about that?
Fabulous. I think I've got a few more questions here. I need to stir you a little bit away from this kind of notion. So Joe raised a really important one, which is about knowing like that access. So VR still has a high bar of entry in terms of cost. So cost is like obviously one of the deciding factors, and the limited audience. Will this change? How quickly? And the other one that keeps coming up in consecutive questions about carbon emissions, questions raised by Joanny. So I think these are two really important key factors we should discuss. So let's see, first and foremost, kind of, does VR have like a limited audience, and what about kind of the cost?
Well, I think it's getting cheaper. I mean, you can get sort of standalone VR headsets for about the price of your average sort of game console now, and you can obviously do it through things like PlayStations and stuff. So it's gradually getting easier. But I think one of the problems is that for sort of things like more unusual experiences, they're not easy to get on necessarily the widely accessible platforms. So there's definitely sort of an issue there.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of like, where are we in this kind of VR world? Where do we think that audiences with, like, particularly with the pandemic, is that going to expand? Is that going to stay? Is that going to get better, worse after the pandemic? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think one of the things is that before the pandemic, we were doing sort of exhibitions and things. So, you know, you'd take your VR to a gallery space and then people would try it there. And there's a kind of hygiene factor now where we can't really do that. And I'm not sure that that's really going to come back. So it does mean also that people actually have to own this stuff and have the kind of platforms. And then how do you get it to them, you know? So there is definitely a kind of a problem there, I think.
Absolutely. I'm moving on to the question about kind of the ecological impact of these tools. It is kind of important, obviously, that we refer, you know, to particularly the ecological impact. Here is a kind of a notion from an audience member of the service and the infrastructure that underpin these tools. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, maybe I can share some thoughts. Because I'm a huge nerd. I buy every possible gadget. It started probably a decade ago when I started buying MIDI keyboards and the Wiimote and the Kinect and the Kinect 2, and then I got an Oculus DK1 and then a DK2 and then a Rift, etc., etc. And it's quite amazing. All this technology is really entertaining, and it's really exciting. And I want to keep consuming those products. But I want to share a slide. I don't know if you can see it right here.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So to be honest, now I have a dual view on like consumption and technology, because I think we are heading right into a dystopia right now. I believe that, well, we were all surprised that festivals are all cancelled. Social spaces are not allowed anymore. So all this, for me, is a bit of a collapse of the society. So I can't be here and say, oh, I like the decay and I like these 60 hertz per second. And I still love these things, but I think the ecological emergency and the pandemics and the democracy falling apart in so many countries, and all this is like, I think it's possibly a beginning of a collapse of the entire society. So maybe now updating the latest firmware of my device is not maybe the priority anymore. So I mean, I wonder. I hope nothing. I hope the collapse will not happen, but it might as well. And also, if we continue in this direction of locking ourselves in bubbles of technology, the dystopia that with all these films about dystopia and end of the world and Mad Max and Waterworld and all these things that influenced me a lot as an artist. Now it's happening, and I realize that now I'm trying to mimicking the sci-fi films I've seen. This is the water screen I've been working on, and you know I'm sort of buying into those dystopian films, and I believe now that the dystopia is happening, and there's a small chance that festivals are not going to happen anymore in the next year, 2 years, 4 years. So I believe as a visual artist, I want to also be a little bit realistic about the state of the world. So I stopped consuming technology. So I prevent myself from buying all these gadgets. because basically it's more consumption of energy. It's participating in this collapse. And all this perspective came to me last year when I discovered this location. It's in Germany. It's the largest coal mine of Europe. I'm just telling this little backstory because that explains my sort of radical activism perspective. But this is the largest source of CO2 emission, and this is what we need to run all these devices. If we want to have a TV screen, a computer, a laptop, 2 internet connections, etc., we need to burn coal, and that's going to cause the extinction of the living world. And I still want the gadgets, but I think we have to be realistic. If we stay in this perspective that consumption is okay and flying around the world is part of our core of our business model, maybe there won't be any, we're trying to project ourselves in 2 years, 5 years when the pandemic is over, but maybe it hasn't even started. Maybe the collapse is just it's going to get worse. So I hope not. But now I want to put my projectionist skills and my work as an artist into action to actually help activists, as opposed to do one person headset experience. That's why I'm starting to work with Extinction Rebellion and to do like direct actions. I will continue to use the gadgets that are all around me and part of my life, but I also want to take this work, music, projection, into activism, because there's a chance here that our role as artists or innovators can be applied to saving some elements of the planet.
Absolutely, Johnny, and thank you for sharing this. Such an important message. We have about 13 minutes left, so I've got a few more questions coming in. I just want to wrap this one up about sustainability. I think this is something we could be going on for days, of course, because it's so important and we should be. I'm just very conscious of time, but I just leave you with Heidegger's notion that he always predicted technology is means to an end. In whatever way we see that. Is it a beginning? Is it an end? At the moment, we find ourselves obviously deeply immersed in this kind of technologically enhanced world. So, but maybe that's some thought I would also like to put out for the audience members, is something that we should all be thinking about, and how we can make this more sustainable. And I think technologists really have to work on this predominantly, so we can reduce the carbon footprint. I just wanted to go back to Sophie. I've interrupted you very rudely, Tarek, earlier on and moved the question, but Sophie would like us to go back to Tarek's questions. So we had, you were really in your element earlier on explaining. That was more kind of like this kind of intimacy kind of notion, and I think I've moved on really quickly from there. Is there anything else you wanted to say, or anybody else in the panel, like remote intimacy?
I mean, I can add in a bit more there and weave it back into what Joni was saying, etc. Just to be clear, for the people who've been artists who've been involved in telepresence, whether it's from dance or sound or whatever, from the mid-90s, we were well aware that it was going to be part of the carbon footprint help. Yeah. Part of the reason for moving into telepresence was to be able to work with colleagues internationally across time and space without having to constantly travel, take flights, etc. It's been on our slide since '99, yeah, and I think the telepresence movement is been both in artist and commercial sector have been very well aware of that. So I think additionally, however, the carbon footprint issue is much bigger now, and that absolutely many people are thinking about this, and receiving content in the virtual form has that plus, if you haven't flown off to the conference or festival or whatever. But it also actually helps with diversity and inclusivity access massively, because people often do not have the finance, the mobility, the chance to move away from home, childcare, etc., to be able to attend many things that probably most of us who are here today, participants and speakers, have had the luck to actually be able to travel worldwide and do our work, yeah, and join each other often physically at different places. So I don't see virtual going away from any of these future events. It is an access point which is bringing in thousands more people to view and see and hear what we're doing. The virtual physical hybrid event will be the future, and we move into that. I think that also the mixed experience, the XR event will be. I'm not someone that works in VR. I find it a deeply disembodying and deeply anti-digital intimacy scenario. I found the picture you showed, Joni, I often use in presentations, the ridiculousness of huge crowds being in VR helmets, unable to be physically aware of themselves when they've all flown there. And they're all men, just to point out, yeah. And there's Mark Zuckerberg, so pleased that no one can see him, yeah. I mean, what is that, yeah? We're moving, VR hasn't done as well as it should have done, particularly in this year, actually, amazingly. And it's augmented reality that will move straight into mainstream by 2022-23. And that gives us that double virtual world on a real world. So you've got your physical presence and you are able to have eye contact with the people at least you're with physically and maintain that. I see one question's come up in the panel, which is a big area for me, which is alongside climate change and sustainability. One of the biggest issues we've all got is actually about body data and actually what is owned of our personal data from the work we do into both in the sensor area, but also in this augmented reality and VR area. And actually what we're looking at here is a massive harvesting of our behavioral scenarios. That is the biggest economy output that they all want. Every corporate wants now is how we behave, what we look at, how we gaze, how we gesture, where we are, when, etc., who with. And that has become a major issue linked to contact tracing apps this year. Actually, it's become a public issue, yeah, but which is an ongoing big issue for all of us to think about. It comes back to Joni and John's point about being attached to Facebook, etc. It's the same thing. We're just giving away behavioral information en masse without getting paid for it, without enabling our participants to be paid for it. And that is used and harvested for the prediction economy to be able to push adverts back at us, yeah, and to create products that they think we want. So we have got some quite key issues here with climate change and behavioural economy, etc.
Yes, absolutely, Galena. Thank you for that. There's because we are nearly wrapping up, but I think there is a really nice kind of like clear message here from several members of the audience, particularly like this one here. It seems that the medium of VR has a unique ability to command focused attention from an audience, quite rightly what we've just discussed. And how does the panel see this aspect of VR being harnessed to explore complex emotional or social issues with a new directness and intensity?
I think there's quite a lot of stuff around that. I think it doesn't always fulfill the hype because there's a lot of kind of VR experiences that are supposed to basically generate empathy from another person's perspective and this kind of thing. And there seems to be an assumption that kind of seeing what someone else might see, or actually just what a camera might see, will somehow give you more of that person's experience than it really does. But I think VR is quite an intense experience. If you play VR horror games, for example, they're pretty visceral. So there's an angle where it kind of feeds into sort of the thirst for ever more kind of visceral entertainment experiences and things as well. And how you see that, I don't know. I'll leave that to others.
Absolutely. Is there anybody else who would like to contribute to this?
I'm just wondering, actually, to go back to you, John, if you're saying that's a very visceral experience, isn't that in a way you having empathy with the virtual character in a horror movie? So where do you think it does work to create empathy, and where do you think that it fails? Because there is an overblown hype, but I also think that there must be a truth also to seeing through somebody's eyes and therefore feeling more of their feelings.
Absolutely.
Yeah, maybe. I think the thing with the horror experiences, it's not so much an empathy thing as just the actual kind of sensory experience of being in these kind of environments. And a lot of the horror games kind of use these sort of jump scares and stuff where things will pop out at you from the darkness and things. So it's almost like sort of exploiting sensory deprivation. And VR is, in a sense, kind of a sensory deprivation device almost, because you're cutting out the outside world.
Absolutely. I'm just going to finish off with some final thoughts here. So we've talked about obviously the new spaces. They need to be really like in terms of consideration with sustainability. Technology has done obviously a lot for us to be able to communicate, to be able to work in the pandemic, and to stay connected. And like Elaine, like you said, we always like, particularly in telepresence, if anybody's working in telepresence or kind of network performance, that main aim was always to bring people together internationally without the need for physical travel. And that is like something that was always very important to me as well. I just always wanted to bring particularly my own students together internationally, because obviously of the cost of travel, and obviously it is very difficult to do so, and even in a normal kind of world, like taking a student cohort of 30 like abroad, as nice as it is, but not everybody can afford to as well. There's obviously there's so much scope for discussion. I think we could go on for days in this one, and I think there were some really, really fascinating points from the panel. I think that some fantastic notions there. There are obviously a lot of unanswered questions. I realize we are very, very like struck for time. A lot of unanswered questions about the new space, but like many panel members said, the mediated space is here to stay. That is for sure in this world. However, there are obviously, we are also very conscious about the impact of social media, the impact of constantly being monitored, obviously unsolicited monitoring from governments, etc. So there are loads of problems with the mediated space. So first and foremost, like I want to just conclude with, you know, the more we can research into that and, you know, create more possibilities without jeopardizing kind of our lives, without jeopardizing kind of our consciousness, that is something that is really, really important, and that should be like an ongoing kind of research and discussion. Thank you so much also to the audiences. There were some really lovely questions there. If anybody has anything else, thank you very much for your lovely messages here. I really appreciate that. So kind of a final thought from the panel. Anybody, just a final thought to wrap it up?
Well, I'll go on it. We need much more diversity of content, whether it's in VR, AR, metaverses, in sound art or whatever. We've got a part of the limits in this sector, in overall media art sector, is it's very, very certain set of people that get to make the content of this work. So VR, horror, games, not for me, but I know they are definitely on for lots of people. But I think that the issue is we've got, and not just in the arts, in it overall, it's 99% white men who are making the content for 99% white men customers. And this will never expand or go anywhere unless we widen this out. So if anyone in the watching or in the panel got opportunities to diversify who you enable to be involved in your content or making content, do it now. And it will expand the width of people who are joining you to watch and participate.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you again, audience, for joining us today and for your lovely messages, and big virtual clap to everybody. So thank you for joining us today, and have a wonderful remaining rest of the symposium. And goodbye to everybody who needs to move on to the next one, and thank you again. Bye-bye.
Bye.